In no-body investigations, the absence of a crime scene forces every detail to carry double weight. Without a confirmed point of disappearance or death, investigators must treat ordinary objects, movements, and messages as potential evidence. In rural North Yorkshire, where woodland moorland and isolated footpaths stretch for miles, those early hours of uncertainty can widen into days. On June 30th, 2005, 19-year-old Jenny Nicholl left her home in Richmond, carrying only a few personal items.
We're camping overnight.
It appeared routine. She often camped with friends and told her mother she would not return that night. Nothing suggested distress planning or preparation for a long-term departure. By the next day, that normal pattern collapsed. Jenny never arrived to meet a friend, missed her shift at the co-op, and stopped answering her phone. 4 days later, her white Rover 214i was found abandoned in a pub car park, locked intact, and offering no indication of what happened after she left home. There were no bank withdrawals, no travel arrangements, no use of her phone beyond a brief cluster of unexplained messages. In a town where sudden vanishings are rare, the stillness around Jenny's life became the first major warning sign. From that point forward, the investigation shifted from a simple absence to the opening stage of a complex criminal case, one defined by concealed relationships, misleading digital clues, and a growing suspicion that Jenny had never left Richmond by choice. On the evening of June 30th, 2005, 19-year-old Jenny Nicholl left her home in Richmond, North Yorkshire, telling her mother she would not be back that night.
Oh man, that took forever.
It appeared to be a routine outing.
We almost gave up and slept.
She often spent nights camping with friends, and nothing about her behavior suggested preparation for a permanent departure. But when she failed to appear for a planned meeting the next day, and then missed her shift at the local co-op, concern began to grow. 4 days after she was last seen, Jenny's white Rover 214i was found abandoned in the car park of a nearby pub, locked and undisturbed, offering no explanation for her disappearance. Search efforts escalated quickly. Hundreds of volunteers joined officers combing through woodland footpaths and moorland.
Where are you?
During these searches, Jenny's cosmetics and nightdress were discovered partially hidden beneath leaves in the Sandbeck plantation, and the first confirmed indication that something was seriously wrong. Investigators then uncovered information that shifted the case from a missing person inquiry to a criminal investigation. Jenny had been involved in a concealed relationship with David Hodgson, a married man in his 40s who had groomed her since she was 14. Hodgson denied recent involvement with Jenny, yet forensic analysis placed both of them inside remote woodland huts associated with him. Days after Jenny vanished, text messages sent from her phone appeared to suggest she had fled to Scotland. But forensic linguistics later showed the messages were not written in her style, pointing instead to deliberate fabrication. Around the same time, Hodgson hired a car and accrued unexplained mileage consistent with travel to the areas where the messages were transmitted. With no evidence that Jenny had planned to leave, no financial activity, no confirmed sightings, and no verified communications from her investigators, concluded she had likely been killed soon after she left home, and that her body had been hidden in the surrounding countryside. Despite extensive searches, it was never found. In 2007, following a 5-week trial built on linguistic evidence, behavioral patterns, and circumstantial forensic links, David Hodgson was convicted of Jenny's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years. He has never revealed where her remains are located. 19-year-old Jenny Nicholl was a familiar presence in Richmond, North Yorkshire, known not for any instability or risk-taking behavior, but for a quiet, predictable rhythm of life. She lived with her mother Anne, a former cleaner, and her father Brian, a retired Army major, in a steady household on Bolton Avenue. Friends and neighbors recalled her as gentle, polite, and reserved, a young woman who kept much of her inner world to herself but maintained warm relationships with those around her. Jenny had a strong creative identity shaped by her interest in music. She was a committed fan of classic rock, especially Jimi Hendrix, and channeled that interest into performance. She played in a local rock band called No Fouling, a group that had built a modest reputation in town. They performed in pubs and community events, earned a place at the Richmond Live Music Festival, and even reached the finals of the Battle of the Bands competition in 2002. For Jenny, music provided both social connection and a sense of belonging within the small but active local scene. Outside of music, Jenny enjoyed spending time outdoors. She frequently went camping in the surrounding countryside, a habit that made her movements difficult to distinguish from normal behavior in the early days of her disappearance. Her comfort with nature and her tendency to stay overnight with friends meant that her initial absence did not appear suspicious. Those close to Jenny described her as private, someone who preferred to manage her own problems and rarely confided deeply in others. This characteristic, while not unusual for someone her age, created challenges once she disappeared. It meant there was limited visibility into her personal relationships, daily stresses, or potential vulnerabilities, factors that investigators later recognized as central to understanding how she became entangled in a concealed, long-term dynamic with an older man. In every documented account, Jenny emerges not as someone seeking danger or escape, but as a young woman rooted in her community, pursuing ordinary interests and moving through life with quiet independence. The final confirmed sighting of Jenny Nicholl occurred on the evening of June 30th, 2005, inside her family home on Bolton Avenue in Richmond. It was a routine moment in an otherwise ordinary day. Jenny told her mother she would be staying out overnight and that she would not return until the following day. This was consistent with her habits. She frequently camped with friends in the surrounding countryside, often carrying only minimal belongings. Nothing about her tone, behavior, or preparation indicated distress or an intention to leave permanently. Jenny left the house wearing casual clothing and carrying a few personal items. There were no large bags, no evidence of long-term packing, and no signs of financial preparation. She did not withdraw money, did not collect travel documents, and did not inform any friends of extended plans. From the perspective of those around her, it appeared she was heading out for one of her usual short outings. By the next morning, that pattern began to break. Jenny failed to arrive for a scheduled meeting with a friend, an arrangement she had made in advance. This was uncharacteristic. Later that day, she did not appear for her shift at the co-op, raising concern among colleagues who knew her to be reliable. Attempts to contact her by phone went unanswered. In the days that followed, friends and family retraced her expected routes, but no confirmed sightings surfaced. The absence of movement, social, financial, or digital, became one of the earliest warning signs in the investigation. What initially looked like a normal overnight trip quietly shifted into an unexplained disappearance, marking the beginning of a case defined by silence, missing time, and a lack of verifiable activity from the moment Jenny walked out the door. When Jenny failed to appear for her scheduled commitments, concern escalated steadily. By the fourth day after she was last seen, the absence could no longer be explained as a routine overnight stay. On July 4th, 2005, her mother Anne formally reported her missing to North Yorkshire Police, marking the point at which the case shifted from informal worry to an official investigation. Later that same day, Anne made a discovery that immediately reframed the situation.
Evidence back in 2004.
While searching the town on foot, she located Jenny's white Rover 214i, parked in the car park of a local pub. The vehicle was locked undamaged and positioned as though it had been left deliberately rather than abandoned in haste. There was no sign of forced entry, no indication of mechanical failure, and no belongings inside the car that suggested a change in Jenny's plans. The placement of the vehicle created an investigative paradox, that the car had clearly been driven from the family home. But nothing around it indicated where Jenny had gone afterward. or whether she had left the area on foot or in another vehicle. The absence of disorder inside the Rover further complicated the early response. There was no evidence of a struggle, no belongings scattered, and no traceable direction of travel. North Yorkshire Police began circulating a detailed description of Jenny distributing hundreds of posters across the region. Local officers conducted door-to-door inquiries around the pub, nearby roads, and residential areas. At this stage, investigators worked under the assumption that locating the last person who saw the vehicle being parked, or anyone who had noticed unusual activity in the vicinity, might provide the first concrete lead. But despite the early visibility of Jenny's car, no witnesses came forward to confirm who left it there or when. The Rover became the investigation's first fixed point,
We have a partial match.
but it delivered no immediate path forward.
Run it again.
In the days following the discovery of Jenny Nicholl's abandoned car, search efforts expanded beyond residential areas into the countryside surrounding Richmond. One of the locations identified early was Sandbeck Plantation, a dense woodland area not far from where Jenny's Rover had been found. The terrain consisted of thick undergrowth, narrow paths, and multiple secluded clearings conditions that required slow, methodical searching. Jenny's parents, Anne and Brian, joined local volunteers as police organized systematic sweeps of the plantation. During one of these early searches, Anne made a critical discovery. Beneath a layer of leaves and debris, she found items belonging to her daughter, a small collection of cosmetics, and a nightdress. The clothing had been partially concealed, suggesting intentional placement rather than accidental loss. This was the first confirmed indication that Jenny had been in the woodland after leaving home. The location of the items also changed the direction of the investigation. What had previously been viewed as a broad missing person case now centered on a specific area with clear evidential value. Following the discovery, North Yorkshire Police established Sandbeck Plantation as a primary search site. Specialist teams conducted fingertip searches, examining soil, foliage, and tree roots for trace materials. Officers mapped the surrounding paths, documented improvised shelters, and logged any objects that could be tied to Jenny's movements or to individuals known to frequent the area. Despite the intensity of the effort, no further items connected directly to Jenny were recovered at that time. But the nightdress and cosmetics established a fixed point in her timeline, one that placed her, or at least her belongings, within a secluded environment commonly used by local men for camping and informal gatherings. This woodland discovery would later become a key structural element in the investigation, linking Jenny's disappearance to individuals familiar with the area and opening the path toward identifying suspects with access to the surrounding terrain. As detectives expanded their inquiries into Jenny Nicholl's personal connections, one name began appearing with increasing frequency: David Hodgson, a married father of two who lived in the same community and whose daughters had attended school with Jenny. At first glance, his presence in her social orbit seemed unremarkable. But as investigators traced communication patterns, routine encounters, and past statements, a private dynamic began to surface, one that fundamentally altered the direction of the case. Interviews with acquaintances indicated that Jenny was habitually private about her relationships and rarely confided in others. This made her interactions difficult to map, but it also meant that any concealed influence could remain undiscovered for long periods. As detectives continued to question people in Jenny's circle, they learned that Hodgson's involvement with her had begun years earlier, long before she reached adulthood. Records and witness accounts showed a gradual pattern of contact consistent with grooming beginning when Jenny was around 14 years old. When first approached by police, Hodgson denied any ongoing romantic or sexual relationship. His explanations were brief, guarded, and often contradicted information officers had already obtained. Under further questioning, he admitted to having been intimate with Jenny, but claimed the encounters occurred only after she turned 16. The inconsistencies in his statements raised concerns about his credibility and his role in her recent movements. Investigators then examined areas within the Sandbeck plantation and nearby woodland locations used informally by local men for camping and socializing. Several of the wooden huts and shelters scattered through the site were linked to Hodgson and his brother, who had constructed them over time. Forensic tests carried out inside 2 of these structures recovered DNA evidence confirming recent sexual contact between Jenny and Hodgson, directly contradicting his earlier claims and placing her within an isolated setting tied to him. The emerging picture showed an adult man with long-term access to Jenny, an influence that had gone largely unrecognized, and a physical connection to secluded woodland sites found along her final known trajectory. These factors elevated Hodgson from a peripheral contact to a central figure in the investigation. In the days immediately following Jenny Nicholl's disappearance, a series of text messages appeared to provide reassurance that she was still alive. These messages, sent from Jenny's mobile phone, were delivered to her friends and to her father between July 7th and July 14th, 2005. At face value, they suggested that Jenny had left Richmond voluntarily and was staying in Scotland with a boyfriend. For investigators, however, the messages quickly became a point of contradiction rather than clarity. The content of the texts referenced personal details such as minor mechanical issues with her car and familiar nicknames that indicated the sender had knowledge of Jenny's daily life. Yet the tone and phrasing differed sharply from her typical writing style. Friends noted this immediately, describing the messages as abrupt, inconsistent, and unlike the way Jenny normally communicated. Technical data raised further concerns. The messages were transmitted from areas near Carlisle and the Scottish borders locations where no verified sightings of Jenny existed and where she had made no known travel arrangements, despite the implication that she had relocated. Jenny's bank account remained untouched, and her phone activity ceased entirely after the final message. The device was never recovered. Detectives increasingly viewed the messages as an attempt to misdirect the investigation. Their timing was significant. They were sent shortly after police first interviewed David Hodgson, and at a moment when scrutiny around Jenny's disappearance was intensifying. This pattern suggested the possibility that someone was trying to create the illusion of a voluntary departure, thereby reducing suspicion and delaying further inquiries. These texts would later become a cornerstone of the forensic case. They introduced the first clear indication of deliberate deception and set the stage for linguistic analysis that ultimately demonstrated they had not been written by Jenny herself. Instead of confirming her safety, the messages marked the beginning of a new investigative phase focused on manipulation concealment and the actions of individuals close to her. As doubts grew around the authenticity of the text messages sent from Jenny Nicholl's phone, investigators turned to a specialist rarely needed in missing person cases, a forensic linguist. Professor Malcolm Coulthard, known for his work on high-profile investigations, was asked to examine the messages attributed to Jenny in the days after she vanished. The analysis began with a controlled comparison. Detectives provided Coulthard with more than 100 text messages written by David Hodgson, on 11 verified messages authored by Jenny, and the 3 disputed messages sent after she disappeared. Each sample was transcribed and stripped down to its structural components, spelling, spacing, punctuation, pronoun usage, and shorthand conventions. Several differences emerged immediately. Jenny consistently used the number 2 as shorthand to attaching it directly to the following word, such as to go or to z. In the disputed messages, however, the number was separated, written as to go and to see. Jenny typically wrote, "I'm and I'm not," while the post-disappearance messages replaced these with "I am and ain't." She used phone instead of phone, a personal quirk absent from the disputed texts. Similarly, her use of my and see you was replaced with me and see in the later messages. When Coulthard compared these features to Hodgson's writing, a different pattern emerged. Hodgson frequently misspelled off as of a detail also present in the disputed texts. He spelled might as might, omitted apostrophes in contractions such as didn't, and used non-standard phrasing consistent with the linguistic profile found in the messages sent after Jenny vanished. Coulthard's conclusion was precise. While no linguistic analysis can identify a single definitive author, the evidence strongly indicated that Jenny did not write the texts, and that the messages shared multiple distinctive features with Hodgson's known writing style. The correspondence between the two sets of patterns placed Hodgson within a small pool of possible authors and critically suggested deliberate imitation of Jenny's texting habits. The linguistic breakdown transformed the messages from ambiguous clues into evidence of deception, reinforcing the growing suspicion that the texts were crafted to delay the investigation and conceal what had happened to Jenny. As inconsistencies mounted around the text messages sent from Jenny Nicholl's phone, detectives expanded their focus to the movements of individuals closely connected to her. One development quickly became central. David Hodgson had hired a car shortly after Jenny disappeared. The timing of this rental aligned closely with the window in which the disputed messages were sent, prompting investigators to examine the vehicle's use in detail. Rental documents confirmed that Hodgson collected the car soon after his first police interview. When officers reviewed the vehicle upon its return, they found no signs of damage or mechanical issues, but the odometer revealed an unexpectedly large increase in mileage. The distances recorded were far greater than would be expected for local travel within the Richmond area. Investigators then compared these unexplained miles with the geographical origin of the text messages sent from Jenny's phone. The messages had been transmitted from regions near Carlisle, and later the Scottish borders, both far from Jenny's home and requiring extensive travel to reach. The mileage logged on the hire car was broadly consistent with a round trip to these same areas. Hodgson was unable to provide a clear or verifiable explanation for his movements during the period in question. He offered no receipts, witness statements, or practical reasons for traveling such distances. His account shifted under questioning, and none of his statements matched the mileage data or the travel patterns implied by the message timestamps. For investigators, the alignment between the car's odometer readings and the phone's transmission points formed a significant circumstantial link. It suggested that the individual who sent the misleading messages had made deliberate journeys to locations far from Richmond, possibly to reinforce the illusion that Jenny had left the area voluntarily. This travel evidence did not place Hodgson at a specific scene, nor did it establish a direct route connected to Jenny's final movements. But it did illustrate a pattern of unexplained long-distance travel at a critical stage of the investigation travel that coincided with the only communications attributed to Jenny after she vanished. When combined with linguistic analysis and other emerging inconsistencies, the hire car's mileage became a key component in the case's evolving narrative of deliberate misdirection. With no verified sightings of Jenny Nicholl and growing concerns about the authenticity of the messages sent from her phone, North Yorkshire Police significantly widened the scope of the investigation. What began as a localized search around Richmond evolved into a coordinated multi-agency effort spanning woodland moorland and rural terrain across the region. Sandbeck Plantation, where Jenny's cosmetics and nightdress had been found, became the central operational point. Specialist teams conducted fingertip searches across the site, dividing the landscape into grid sections and examining soil foliage and structural features for any sign of disturbance. The work was meticulous, slow, repetitive, and often physically demanding, but necessary in an area where even a small anomaly could represent the only available lead. Given the scale of the land to be covered, North Yorkshire Police brought in support from military personnel who assisted with terrain sweeps, rope access, and searches of steep banks and concealed drops. The team also surveyed cave shafts and disused structures across more than 150 acres, documenting each location and ruling out potential deposition sites one by one. During these expanded searches, 2 additional items connected to Jenny were recovered: a teddy bear and a portable stereo, both found within the wooded perimeter of Sandbeck Plantation. These discoveries did not reveal a precise sequence of events, but they strengthened the conclusion that Jenny or her belongings had been present in the area after she left home. As detectives consolidated evidence, they also initiated a full case review by retired senior officers seeking fresh perspectives on the investigative threads. The review confirmed the necessity of maintaining the search radius and recommended continued attention on individuals with known access to the woodland, including those familiar with the network of huts and informal shelters scattered throughout the site. Despite the scale of the operation, no trace of Jenny's body was located. Yet the additional items and the concentrated activity within Sandbeck further reinforced the working hypothesis. Whatever had happened to Jenny, the answer lay somewhere within the intersecting paths of the plantation and the people who used it. By early November 2005, more than 4 months after Jenny Nicholl was last seen, the investigative landscape had shifted significantly. The absence of financial activity, the disappearance of her phone after a brief cluster of suspicious messages, the discovery of her belongings in the woodland, and the inconsistencies surrounding David Hodgson's movements collectively undermined the possibility that Jenny had left home voluntarily. Each new development pushed the case further from the framework of a disappearance and closer to the threshold of criminal suspicion. On November 3, 2005, North Yorkshire Police formally reclassified the case. What had initially been treated as a missing person inquiry was now designated a murder investigation. This decision was not based on a single piece of evidence, but on the cumulative weight of multiple indicators. No independent confirmation that Jenny was alive after June 30th. No financial, digital, or social activity consistent with continued voluntary movement. Belongings located in a remote woodland without explanation. The emergence of a concealed long-term relationship with an older man who had access to secluded locations. Text messages that forensic specialists determined she did not write. Unexplained travel by Hodgson during the critical period. The shift in classification allowed investigators to expand their operational scope. Search parameters widened, additional forensic resources were allocated, and detectives gained the authority to explore potential foul play with greater depth. The reclassification also marked a turning point for Jenny's family, who now faced the legal acknowledgement that their daughter was unlikely to be alive. From that moment forward, the investigation focused not only on locating Jenny, but on determining who was responsible when the crime occurred and where her body had been concealed. The case moved from uncertainty to a structured criminal inquiry, one shaped increasingly by the behavior movements and evolving contradictions surrounding David Hodgson. As the investigation progressed into early 2006, the evidential framework surrounding Jenny Nicholl's disappearance had crystallized around one primary figure, David Hodgson. His concealed relationship with Jenny, the forensic links inside the woodland huts, the deceptive text messages, and the unexplained movements in the hire car collectively positioned him at the center of the inquiry. With the case now formally classified as a murder investigation, police moved to secure key suspects for questioning. On January 17, 2006, officers arrested David Hodgson and his brother Robert Hodgson on suspicion of murdering Jenny. Both men were taken into custody for interview. Investigators believed Robert's involvement needed to be assessed due to his familiarity with the woodland structures and his proximity to David's activities during the relevant period. After extensive questioning and review of available evidence, Robert was released without charge. No material linked him to Jenny's disappearance. David Hodgson was released on bail pending further inquiries, but the case against him continued to strengthen. Detectives conducted additional reviews of his statements, compared his timelines to phone data, and revisited the forensic and linguistic evidence. Meanwhile, specialist officers and retired senior investigators performed a formal case assessment to determine whether the available material met the threshold for prosecution. By early 2007, the Crown Prosecution Service concluded that the evidentiary foundation, though circumstantial in some areas, was sufficiently coherent, consistent, and compelling. The absence of a body did not preclude prosecution. Instead, the totality of behavioral forensic and linguistic indicators pointed decisively toward homicide and an effort to conceal the crime. In May 2007, prosecutors announced that David Hodgson would be charged with the murder of Jenny Nicholl. Chief Crown Prosecutor Robert Turnbull described the case as unusual due to the lack of recovered remains, but emphasized that the evidence established a realistic prospect of conviction. With the charge formally laid, the case transitioned into its next phase, a full criminal trial, where the events surrounding Jenny's final hours would be presented before a jury for judicial determination. The trial of David Hodgson for the murder of Jenny Nicholl commenced in early 2007 at Teesside Crown Court. It lasted 5 weeks and brought into public view the private details of Jenny's life that had remained largely hidden throughout the initial stages of the investigation. Prosecutors presented a case built on cumulative interlocking evidence rather than a single decisive finding. The grooming relationship, the Woodland DNA, traces the deceptive text messages and the unexplained travel in the hire car. The prosecution argued that Jenny had been killed on the night she left home, likely during a camping trip or a meeting arranged with Hodgson. They contended that her body had been disposed of somewhere within the surrounding countryside, with the intention that it would never be recovered. Prosecutor James Goss, KC, emphasized that the text messages sent from Jenny's phone were crafted by someone who knew she was already dead and who needed to create a narrative of voluntary disappearance to divert suspicion. Central to the prosecution's evidence was the forensic linguistic analysis, which demonstrated that the post-disappearance messages did not match Jenny's established writing patterns, but showed multiple consistencies with Hodgson's. The odometer readings from the hire car were also presented, showing lengthy, unaccounted-for travel that aligned with the locations from which the false messages were transmitted. The defense attempted to reposition Jenny's disappearance as a voluntary act, suggesting that she had left home to escape personal difficulties. They raised allegations about her home environment and portrayed the text messages as consistent with a decision to separate from her family. The judge later described these claims as unsupported by any credible evidence. Jenny's parents were called as witnesses and faced detailed questioning about family life, adding further strain to an already traumatic process. Despite this, the overall structure of the prosecution's case remained intact. After 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict. Hodgson showed no emotion as the decision was read. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years. The judge, Mr. Justice Openshaw, noted that the concealment of Jenny's body had greatly prolonged her family's suffering and demonstrated Hodgson's complete lack of remorse. Hodgson has never disclosed what happened to Jenny's remains. Following David Hodgson's conviction, and the absence of Jenny Nicholl's body remained the central and most painful unresolved element of the case. With no confirmed recovery site, no physical remains, and no disclosure from the perpetrator, her family entered a prolonged period of uncertainty that extended far beyond the trial. The legal verdict established accountability, but it did not answer the fundamental question of where Jenny was laid to rest. Jenny's parents, Anne and Brian, later described the courtroom experience as deeply distressing. Throughout the trial, they were subjected to detailed questioning about their home life, personal relationships, and Jenny's upbringing. They stated publicly that they felt the process placed them under scrutiny rather than focusing solely on the defendant's actions. Their testimonies echoed concerns raised by other families in high-profile cases, including the family of Millie Dowler, who similarly argued that the criminal justice system left victims' relatives vulnerable to unnecessary re-traumatization. As Hodgson began serving his life, sentence attention turned to a broader legal issue highlighted by Jenny's case offenders, who refused to disclose the whereabouts of their victims' remains. This long-standing gap in the justice system became a point of national debate, driven in part by cases like Jenny's and by the advocacy of families in similar circumstances. The resulting legislation, known as Helen's Law, formerly the Prisoner Disclosure of Information About Victims Act 2020, was introduced to ensure that failure to reveal the location of a victim's body is taken into account during parole assessments. When Hodgson later applied for parole, the board cited his continued refusal to provide any information about what happened to Jenny's remains. Under Helen's Law, this refusal weighed heavily against him, and his application was denied. The ruling stated that his non-disclosure demonstrated an ongoing risk and a lack of remorse. For investigators involved in the case, the lack of recovery remains a point of lasting regret. Retired officers have spoken about the enduring impact of Jenny's disappearance, noting that even years later, small reminders like a song on the radio can bring the case sharply back into focus. Jenny Nicholl's story remains a stark example of the lasting consequences of a no-body murder. A conviction secured without closure, a family left without answers, and a legal system forced to reckon with the need for reform. Jenny Nicholl's disappearance underscores the profound and lasting impact of no-body murders, not only on investigations, but on the families who must navigate years of uncertainty without the ability to grieve in the ordinary way. Her case demonstrates how secrecy manipulation and hidden power dynamics can isolate vulnerable young people, leaving them without the support networks needed to recognize exploitation or to speak openly about dangerous relationships. The investigation revealed how easily control can be exerted behind closed doors and how grooming can continue unnoticed in communities where familiarity is often mistaken for safety. It also exposed the limitations of traditional criminal procedures, where the absence of physical remains complicates both the search for truth and the pursuit of justice. Jenny's story contributed to broader legal reforms, including the creation of Helen's Law, which now ensures that offenders who withhold the location of their victims' bodies face closer scrutiny during parole decisions. Yet legislation alone cannot fill the void left for families who cannot bring their loved ones home. Her case stands as a reminder of the need for stronger safeguards for vulnerable individuals, better recognition of grooming behaviors, and continued support for families navigating the aftermath of unresolved loss.